Okay, so first of all, bats are found all over the world. The only place they're not found is in the polar regions. So everything that's colored white, you'll see that there's no bats there. I was amazed there's even bats in Alaska. The majority of bats, the densest population, the most species are found around the tropical regions. So tropical rainforests are home to a huge majority of the species. Worldwide, we have 1,400 plus species. So they're pretty numerous. 47 species in the United States, and then also 32 species in Texas. So we have more bats in Texas than we have in the rest of the states, which is woohoo, you know, bigger and better in Texas. And all bats are protected under state law in Texas. Bats are not rodents. They're found in their own order called Chiroptera, which means hand wing. They're the only mammal that's capable of true powered flight. So you've heard flying squirrels. Flying squirrels glide. So they should be kind of like sugar gliders, you know, gliding squirrels, not flying squirrels. But bats actually push their way through the air like a bird would. They have interesting anatomy, and you can see they look a lot like a human anatomy in a way, because they've got shoulders, they've got elbows, they've got a wrist, they've got fingers that are actually bones within the wing. If you can see in my pointer, you can see this little bitty stub that sticks out. That's the thumb. The other fingers, they're all kind of, the second and third finger are close together. And then there's a fourth and fifth finger. They have ears, they have feet, they have, you know, legs just like we do with knees and everything. They have tails, and they have 10 toes. So kind of interesting animal. This is an insect eating bat. So you can see it's got a tail that's fully enclosed by the tail membrane. This is a fruit bat skeleton, and the main difference here is that the tail is not, there is no tail, right? The bones are a little more stout and thick, and it's mainly because fruit bats are a little bit bigger bats, you know, heavier bats. They usually have thicker teeth, more molars for chewing on fruit and crunchy things, you know, tough things. So the other parts of their anatomy you don't usually see when they're on the ground. I hear somebody in the background. Is that you trying to give me a message or anything? Okay, I'll keep going. So when they're on the ground, this is usually how you see bats, unless you see them flying. They've got their wings tucked up, so it's kind of like an umbrella, you know, kind of folded up against their forearm. And what they're crawling on are their wrists, and you can see their thumb out. That's the hook that you see, the kind of the part right here that's kind of like a claw. That's their thumb. So they're walking on their wrists, their thumb, and their 10 toes on their back feet. So I don't know how comfortable that would be for me. I don't think very comfortable, but bats do it all the time. And so when they climb on things, they're using their thumb to hook in, and then their toes to kind of propel them upward or downward, depending on which direction they're going. This is a Mexican free-tailed bat, and if you notice down by the base of the tail, part of the membrane does not include the tail. So part of the tail is, quote, free from the membrane, and that's how it gets its name, Mexican free-tailed. So one of the things that bats have that's pretty unique amongst the mammals, dolphins do it, some whales can do it, echolocation it's called, and it's using sound to try and identify objects. And the reason they do this is not because they're blind, but because they're hunting things that are out in the dark and they're very difficult to see. So if you imagine a mosquito or a moth that's gray colored, or any kind of, you know, dark animal in the dark, these bats are trying to catch that insect usually. So they use sound. They send sound waves out of their mouth, so clicks, out into the air. It bounces off an object, and the echo comes back to the bat's ears. The bat's able to discern what that object was just from the echo. And so as they get closer and closer to what they think is an insect, at the very end, they'll send out like a barrage of sound, and it sounds kind of like a brrr sound. And that gives them enough detail that they can pinpoint the location of that insect and grab it in midair and then eat it in midair. So usually after the brrr sound, you'll hear dead silence for a minute. And so it's been an indicator for bat biologists and researchers. You can always tell what a bat's doing when you hear that click, 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 brrr sound, because you know, okay, they're out hunting and they just caught something, right? Because now there's silence. We have machines that can pick up that echolocation call because it's usually too high pitched for our ears to be able to hear it. So these machines bring that sound down low so our ears can hear it. Let me play a couple of recordings from a bat detector. The first one is from a Mexican free-tailed bat, and this is what its echolocation call sounds like. Do you hear that brrr? You know, at parts of it, that's where it's right up on an insect and just about to grab it. Here's the big brown bat. And you can tell they sound completely different. It also, they would look different as well. So on the screen of the iPad, we plugged in that little red box at the top is a bat detector. And if you plug that into an iPhone or an iPad or any kind of phone, it will not only show you what the call looks like, but it can also give you some suggestions on what it thinks is the identification of that bat. And it's comparing the sound that it just recorded from the bat call to a library of other bat calls. So it's picking up a little snippet and saying, okay, is this, you know, this sounds like maybe it's this. And then it's up to you to kind of determine what do you think it might be. And using echolocation, bats can detect items about 100 feet in front of them. So across the world, you got the largest and the smallest bat. The smallest bat is the Kitti's hognose bat. It's also known as the bumblebee bat. And if you hold your hand up in front of your screen and kind of imagine a bat placed right there on your fingers, you can see it's just a little bit larger than a bumblebee, but it's pretty tiny. It is an insect-eating bat, and it weighs less than a penny. So if you put a penny in your palm, that's about as much as that bat weighs. It's a tiny little bat. And then the world's largest bat has a wingspan of 6 feet, and it's about the size of a bald eagle. So if you can imagine, you know, the size, it's pretty good size. It's a fruit bat. So if it was a 6-foot insect-eating bat, I don't think it would survive. But anyway, so eats lots of fruit. So bats eat a variety of food, speaking of that, all over the world, and some of them are pretty crucial for us. Fruit-eating bats are probably the most commonly known amongst most people because of all the stories and books and things like that that are written about them. They're pretty cute. They're also known as flying foxes, and I think you can see why with the face. Most of them have that kind of foxy looking face. Fruit bats are relying on their eyesight, so they have large eyes, and they're relying on long, big noses, their smell, to be able to find food. So they feed almost exclusively on fruit, including the seeds, and they can travel long distances to find that fruit. So they're looking for it and smelling for it. Of course, they're not found in Texas, but they are important seed dispersers across the world. So as they fly through the rainforest and they've eaten a bunch of fruit, of course, they have to, go to the bathroom at times. And so their droppings land on the floor of the rainforest and help new trees and new fruit trees grow. So they're helping to reseed and regrow the forest. It's especially important in deforested areas. We also have flower feeding bats. And so these bats go to flowers and they're in search of nectar, but they also end up eating some of the pollen, which is protein rich. So that's how they manage to survive. They're eating nectar and pollen. And if you look at the face, they're usually long nosed or they could be long tongued. And it's enabling them to fit inside that flower. We have 2 species of nectar feeding bats in Texas. They're on the Rio Grande border. So you won't find them usually in the center part of Texas or even in our part of Texas. There have been a few strays that have come into like Hays County or San Antonio and have ended up feeding at nectar hummingbird feeders. But yeah, it's really rare. So in Texas, we have 2. They are the Mexican long-nosed bat and the Mexican long-tongued bat. So pretty descriptive on what they look like. One of them, the long-nosed bat, is federally endangered now, and the other one is not. Although I suspect they are considering that. They feed primarily on cactus flowers, and agaves are important to them. We'll talk about that in just a second. So transferring pollen from one plant to another by bats has its own special term. Unfortunately, I'm not going to try and pronounce it. I'm not very good at that. Chiroptophilia, I don't know. Anyway, and it's really interesting. It's an interesting relationship between plants and bats. And there are times when the plants are trying to encourage bats, to come and say, we're going to lure you here, so you'll be here when we bloom, and so you can pollinate us. Sometimes they'll use volatile chemicals, organic compounds in their leaves to lure the bats to them, just the scent of it. It could be leaves are reflecting the bats' calls, the echolocation calls. And so it's encouraging them to roost nearby. Come stay here and then we'll bloom and you'll be here. Flower shapes are super important. So there are some species like this passion flower that's in the picture. It's in Ecuador. And it actually has all of its pollinating structures up on the top part of the plant, not deep inside. So the bat sticks its face and part of its body deep inside to get the nectar, and it's putting the pollen on the back of the bat, kind of on the nape of the neck and between the shoulder blades. And that way the bat can't lick it off, right? Can't get rid of it. And so the bat goes to the next flower and leaves, some of that pollen behind, and it's pollinating the plants. But it made it specifically for that bat. So it's a bat pollinated plant. And then, we have lots of plants like that are tubular shaped, or the flower shape is in such a way that it's discouraging other animals from pollinating it and encouraging bats to come and pollinate it. And also some flowers bloom only at night. So it's encouraging only nocturnal species. And then if they're shaped just for bats, then it's preferring bats to pollinate it. They're pretty amazing. We have 530 plus species of flowering plants that rely just on bats, or bats as a major pollinator. Some of them agave, saguaro, Oregon pipe, various cactuses or cacti, bananas, guavas, mangoes, figs, dates, cashews. I mean, I've eaten all of those. I'm happy that bats are pollinating them, and I don't think there are very many other pollinators that pollinate those plants. So we rely on bats as pollinators as well. There's a project that's going on through Bat Conservation International, and I encourage you to go on their website and look in, or just Google the agave project. So agave cacti bloom once in their lifetime. So each plant only blooms once ever. And so the bats that are relying, the Mexican long-nosed bats, rely on agave among other cacti as food sources. So these bats do kind of a loop from the center of Mexico up into the US, up into Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, a little bit of California, and then back down into Mexico. So it's this giant loop. And they're following the bloom cycle of the agaves. And we went through a spell where Mexican farmers were bulldozing their agave plants because they weren't making as much money as you could make planting corn. So they went and planted a bunch of corn because they could sell it to the United States for ethanol and other corn-based things that we were needing at the time. And they were getting higher prices. But the bats were missing out because all of a sudden their food sources were disappearing or gone. So these are endangered bats. And so Bat Conservation International is working with farmers now to replant agaves. But of course, they have to start with small plants. And it takes years and years and years for these agave plants to grow big enough to be able to bloom. So it's an interesting project. It's sorely needed, but it's going to take a little while. And so they're using volunteers. If you ever want to help, plant agaves, I'm sure they'd be willing. But it's it's a great project, and I hope you'll read more about it. So we also, going back to the food sources, we also have blood feeding bats. There are 3 species. They are not found in Texas. They are in Latin America, so Mexico, Central America, and into South America. They feed on primarily mammals, but then there is one species that feeds on birds. And they have like heat sensors around their muzzle, around their mouth. And they're kind of like pit vipers in that they can sense the heat. So they come toward that warm-blooded animal and then find a place. Usually it's sleeping. And so they come to a foot, or they get on its back or something, and they'll make a tiny little cut and lick the blood that comes to the surface of that cut. They have an anticoagulant in their saliva that keeps the blood flowing as long as they lick. But when they stop licking, no more anticoagulant. And so the blood gels, it forms a scab. And they're actually using this compound in the saliva for heart patients. So it's actually useful to us. But one of the issues with vampire bats is that they can have rabies, and they can, through that blood, making the cut and licking that blood, they can transfer rabies to that animal. So if it's a warm-blooded mammal, then that was a stupid thing to say. If it's a mammal, then they can give it rabies. And so that's an issue, especially in Mexico. And so some of the issues have been that the farmers or ranchers, if they find vampires feeding on their animals, then they dynamite the caves that have bat roosts in them. And they not only kill the vampire bats, but they kill fruit bats and other bats that are roosting there. So they're trying to find other alternatives, ways to kill off the vampire colony, but not blow up everybody else. We also have carnivorous bats that feed on other bats, birds, other small animals. And this picture is a frog eating bat, and it can actually use its echolocation to find the animals, but it's listening for the animal calls. And once it hears the frog start calling, then it can determine where it's located and what type of frog it is, and then come in closer, take a look at it, and then grab it if they are hungry, if it looks like the right kind, what it's looking for that night. We don't have those in Texas either. And fish-eating bats we don't have in Texas either, but they're fascinating. So look at this bat. He's hollering, so he's obviously calling, making his echolocation call. He's got a fish in his feet, and if you look at his feet, they are super long, almost like catcher's mitts. And so this bat has used its echolocation to bounce off the water surface, and it can detect fish or small fish underneath the water surface, and then fly down and grab them with its feet. So pretty amazing. Doesn't even use its mouth at that particular point. And then the huge majority of bats, especially all of those in Texas, except for those 2 nectar feeding bats, they all eat insects. So this is a huge group of bats. They use echolocation almost exclusively, and they can detect things as fine as a human hair, which makes it difficult to try and trap them. A lot of times biologists will use, it's almost like ladies' hair nets. It's like a big net, and it's really fine material. And if it moves at all, the bats detect it. So they can go up to the net, up and over and around. And so you want to do it on a night when there's hardly any wind, nothing's moving, because and you put it over water. And when they come down to get water, they open their mouth and they don't use their echolocation because they're preparing to get a mouthful of water. And sometimes you can catch them in a net that way. But these insect-eating bats are really, really important, especially in our area, because they're eating pests, that insect pests in forests and on crops. We'll talk about that. So the one thing that bats don't like, and if you remember the map, they're not found in polar regions. They don't like cold. So it's very difficult for them to survive cold. And they've come up with 3 main strategies. The first one is get out of Dodge. So fly south, go to warmer weather, right? So we call that migration. So 2 times a year, so in the spring and in the fall, bats are coming and going through our area. This time of year, they're coming back from migration. So they're coming back from warmer areas, and they're coming back to their roosts, their big major roosts. And during the summertime, they'll produce young, right? That's when they produce pups. And then in the fall, they're moving south again to go to warmer climate. The other way, second way, is hibernation. And people are pretty familiar with that with bears and other species. Bats can do it too. And there are certain species that's how they survive the winter. They find a cave or someplace that's just the perfect temperature, perfect humidity, everything, the conditions are just right. And they roost there, and they drop their body temperature, their metabolism slows down, their breathing heart rate slow down, and they just go into a deep sleep, and they live off their body fat. And so hopefully they're nice and fat when they go into hibernation, and they'll be pretty slender when they come out. The one obstacle to them there is if there's any disturbances in the cave during the winter, it can wake them up and they'll use up their body fat too fast. So white nose syndrome, the white nose fungus, is one of those things that can keep them awake and keep them moving too much, and their body temperature rises. And so they use up their body fat too fast. And so a lot of the species that are having issues with white nose syndrome are actually starving during the wintertime because they're active and awake too much. So the third method is what we see here in Texas a lot. We have species in Texas that migrate, We have species that hibernate, but the huge majority of our species go into what's called torpor. And hummingbirds do it, other species do it. It's kind of a mini hibernation. And so they go into a little short sleep. So it might be for 2 days and not, months. Torpor usually happens when the temperature gets below 50 degrees. And so the bats kind of say, I'm not going out. There's no insects flying around. Everything's quiet. I'm just going to stay in my roost and I'm just going to sleep. And so they let their metabolism drop. If you touched them, which I don't want you to do, but if they touched them, they'd feel cold. And you'd think, oh, that's a dead bat. But it's just in torpor. And then when the temperature warms back up, they warm back up. So they start shivering, awaken, and then they're ready to go out and hunt if it's warm enough and if insects are out, available for them to use. So 3 different ways to survive. Threats to bats, of course, it's habitat loss, roost destruction, loss of food sources. And one of the issues nowadays is a decrease in insect numbers. So insect populations, could be pesticide uses, things like that. White nose syndrome is another impact on them now. We do have that in Texas. Wind turbines, believe it or not, are an obstacle for some bats. Some are more susceptible to them, and I'm not sure that anybody understands yet why, but sometimes bats are actually attracted to wind turbines and they can run into the turbine blades. Also, any kind of human interactions can sometimes be negative for bats. So what can we do to help bats? First one is exactly what you guys are doing. Learn more about bats. Be observant. When you see a bat, don't shriek and run away. Appreciate them for when you see them, because they're out doing pest control at night. And share your knowledge about them with others. That's really important. Report groups of dead or ill bats to Parks and Wildlife and the Houston's Humane Society Wildlife Center. They now have bat specialists that can go and assess, what's going on with the bats, and then rehab them if they need to. Report any bat roosts to TPWD or iNaturalist. Protect bat roosts that you might find, dead or hollow trees, especially black gum trees, big hollow black gums. And protect bat habitat if you can, and then support bat organizations. And we have several in Texas. I put them in alphabetical order, but Austin Bat Refuge is primarily hill country, but they also take in rehab bats. Bat Conservation International does conservation of bats worldwide. Bat World Sanctuary primarily works in Texas, but I think they also do some nationwide stuff as well. And then the Houston Humane Society now has local bat rehabbers and rescuers. So we're getting more people, involved in bats. So the other thing you can do is provide water for bats. Usually they need something that's kind of wide open that they can fly over. So they're going to fly over it with their mouth open and dip down, grab a mouthful of water, and then fly back up, move on a little bit. So you don't want to have any kind of big obstacles in the water, nothing they'd run into. You can also put up bat houses. The one thing I would say is don't put them on a tree. I know that's hard for the woodlands and folks in East Texas because, we're surrounded by trees. But you need to put it on a pole, and it needs to get at least 6 hours of sun a day shining on that bat house. If you put it on a tree, it gets a little too shady most of the time, and snakes, which are a primary predator of bats, can get up in the bat house during the day when bats are sleeping, and so they're not able to move out of the way as quickly and get out of the way of the snake. 12 to 15 feet off the ground, and keep it away from obstacles like, if a snake wanted to drop out of a tree onto a bat house, you don't want that to happen. You can also put them back to back and, maximize your use of the pole. And then also do bat-friendly exclusions. If by any chance you get bats in an attic or in a building, a lot of times they like to get between the walls of like a T111 siding type building. And you can get them out pretty easily using techniques that are like one-way doors. So you put the whatever, the tube or whatever we're using at the time over the opening. The bat can slide out, but then it can't get back in. And the one thing it's important to know is don't do it in the summertime. Even though it's nice and warm and bats are active, that's also when they potentially could have pups. And so there could be pups in the attic. And if you exclude the mama, then she can't get back in to feed her young. So don't do it during the, June, July, August. And then the other thing I would suggest is that you use shielded lighting. A lot of times we have light at night that's shining up, and especially if it's in areas where there is a bat roost, it's kind of giving bats night blindness, so to speak. So when they emerge from the roost, it's like this giant shining light in their face, and it's harder for their eyes to adjust to avoid obstacles. So putting a shield on the top so it's not projecting the light up, but projecting the light down is super helpful. And the last thing I'll mention is the bat teams. So we have 2 bat teams in the area, Houston area bat team and the Huntsville bat team. And both are doing amazing stuff. So we have lots of projects going on. The Houston bat team is doing some Doppler radar work. And we're also giving bat chats on Friday nights down at Waugh Bridge, and also boat trips, boat talks on boat trips down the Buffalo Bayou to see the bats emerge. We also give talks at schools and things like that when we have the time. But we're all volunteers. Most of us are master naturalists. So yeah, it's tough sometimes to get to everything that people want. And then Jennifer's going to talk more about the Huntsville bat team and all the amazing things that they are doing, and how you can, join up. So one last thing, we are having a new training for people that might be interested in bats. You don't have to join a bat team, but we'd love for you to join if you'd like to. It's going to be on Saturday, March 23rd in the morning. So the training is actually 9:30 to 11. And then the bat team, Houston bat team, is meeting from 11 to noon. And so you could meet other bat team members, things like that. But we'll train you in what you need to know and get you started. And then you'll have to do some research on your own as well. But we have lots of things that you could participate in. So who are our local bats? And I'll go through these really fast. We have 11 species. They're all equally interesting. My favorite is the Raffinese big-eared bat. So I'm going to start with him. This one, if you notice on this list, look at the names really quickly. Most of them are related to color or location. And bat biologists are not super clever when it comes to naming, I think, right? So it's kind of what the bat looks like and maybe where it's found. So the first one is Raffinese big-eared bat, and you can tell why it gets the name big-eared. This is a gleaning bat. So it's listening for the insect calls in the forest, and then it dives into the bush and grabs the insect. And this bat tends to eat those big palmetto bugs, the roaches. So it's my favorite bat. And it is found in your area. So the farthest west location of this bat has been Jesse Jones Nature Center. And then it's all up into Montgomery County and Livingston, all around Polk County, all up in there. And it can live in abandoned buildings, and hollow trees is its favorite roost. So big black gums, hollow black gums. Southeastern Myotis lives in bottomland hardwoods as well, and similar to the Raffinese big-eared bat, but it's a tiny bat. And It eats small things. So this is one of the bats that could eat mosquitoes and gnats and midges and the mosquito eaters or mosquito hawks or crane flies, whatever you want to call them, things like that. And then the silver-haired bat, you can tell how it gets that name. This is one that flies through our area, but it usually doesn't stop. I mean, it might roost overnight or something on its way, but it's looking for higher elevations, and that's usually where it roosts. So mountainous regions, things like that. But it does come through Texas on its way in migration. Hoary bat, same thing. So it's migrating through. We do get this one more often. We pick this one up more often. And this is one of the bats that for some reason is attracted to wind turbines and gets killed quite often by wind turbines. But you can see it's a gorgeous bat. Eastern red bat is one of our most common species in the forested areas around Harris County, Montgomery County, and on up. And this bat has more than one pup. So during the summer months, she could have up to 4, even 5 pups sometimes. And you can see in this picture, there's 2 pups that are hanging on her. They're hanging on the branch actually, but they're up against her. And they're almost the same size as this female. So you can imagine if she had 4 pups clinging to her and she's trying to fly. The one time that they fly away from the canopy of trees is if there's a storm and they're trying to get out of the way of the storm and trying to find shelter. So a lot of times they're found under eaves of houses and things like that. Don't worry, they'll usually leave the next night. So anyway, they're really interesting. Yet northern yellow bats, similar to the red bat, they're yellow, and they can be found in dead palm fronds. So also in Spanish moss, things like that. So they're a tree bat also. Seminole bat, similar, same types of habitats, tree bat, pine needles, things like that. That's where they roost. Tricolored bat, named because each hair on this bat has 3 colors. So this is one that hibernates in Texas. So this is also one that's susceptible to white nose syndrome, the fungus that causes white nose. And it eats a lot of smaller insects, potentially mosquitoes. And its weight, it's so small, it weighs about 1/4. So if you put a quarter in your palm, that's about as much as that bat weighs. Big brown bat, a common bat in our area. It's more of an urban bat. So it likes to be around people, and it can be around buildings, bridges, bat houses, common resident of bat houses. It also likes hollow trees. And it eats beetles. So if you look at its face, it's got these big giant jaw muscles. And it's for crunching down on beetles, the hard shell of beetles. So think of it eating June bugs. This bat, the evening bat, looks a lot like it. It's a much smaller bat. And look at the delicate face. So it doesn't have those big jaw muscles. And it eats smaller insects, smaller things. This one usually is found, it can be in bat houses, things like that. But I often find it under the bark of pine trees, bark of pine trees. The last bat is the Mexican free-tailed bat, or also known as Brazilian free-tailed bat. And this is our official state flying mammal. We have other types of official state mammals, but this is the flying mammal. And again, you can tell how it gets the name by the tail, because only part of the tail is covered in membrane. They eat primarily moths. And so they are crucial for farmers. Farmers love them. They eat tons of crop pests like corn earworm moths and tobacco worm moths and all types of these moths that fly in. They hatch in Mexico and fly in to central Texas. And these bats are up there waiting and just chomping away at them. They do migrate, or they can overwinter and go into torpor. Their wingspan is about 1 foot. And their weight is about 2 quarters. So Jennifer, are you ready? I can't hear you. There you are.
There I am.
Okay. All right. I'm
Well,
gonna,
okay, stick around.
okay, okay. I have
Thank,
a video to play. Do you want me to start it now?
sure.
Okay.
There they go. So I'm going to briefly tell you about the Huntsville bat colony. They reside in this building that you see there that belongs to Texas Department of Criminal Justice. It's directly across the street. You'll see that brick building there on your left. That's the Walls unit in Huntsville. It's where executions are held. In fact, I was there last night collecting data and there was an execution. Kind of
Oh,
creepy. Yeah, it was kind of sad. But the building was originally built in the 1930s, I believe, and in late 1990s, there was a fire that gutted the building. It had a few offices, but it was largely used to store cotton that the inmates grew for uniforms and other things that they needed. And the bats moved in after that. Once it was gutted, they moved in. And they lived there happily for a long time. And then TDCJA decided that that was a really nice piece of real estate and they needed a parking lot for employees. So they decided they were going to tear it down. They tore down one small portion on the north end of the building. And then the local residents went to bat for the bats. And so a stakeholder committee was formed and they're trying to make decisions about what would be best for this colony. And so as part of that agreement, Texas Parks and Wildlife just started to use master naturalists to collect data on this colony. So I originally started collecting data on bats for Diana back in 2014. I can't believe it was that long ago. For for a small colony that's in the woodlands. I won't tell you where. It was pretty devastated during the freeze of 1920 or 2021, the Uri, Storm Uri. And I have not been back since then. But I decided to jump on this project last year, and 43 Monday nights of last year, I was parked right outside that warehouse collecting data. I've already started collecting data for this year. Last night was number 4 for this year so far. And only the last 2 weeks have there been emergence. So before that, either it was too cold or there was only an overwintering small group of bats inside. But for the last 2 weeks, there's been a really good emergence of bats. I will continue to see the numbers build through the spring. If you think you want to come, I'm going to encourage you to come during the spring because it gets really, really hot in the summer and it's miserable to sit there and wait for an emergence, even though the peak number is usually around the end of July and 1st of August when the pups have weaned and they start joining their moms for feeding at night. If you want to come out, you come out any night of the week. If it's raining, I wouldn't bother because although they did come out for me one time last year during a light rain, they normally don't come out during a rain. They usually, as Diana said, don't come out below 50 degrees. However, last night it was right at 50 degrees and they came out. So they keep surprising me. I've really enjoyed participating in this project just from being there consistently week after week, making observations about the species and being able to share that information with Diana or Tristan Bryant or the state Texas Parks and Wildlife bat specialist and, get their feedback on what I'm seeing and smelling. So that's been interesting for me. As Diana pointed out, this particular species, the Mexican freetail, only has one pup a year, and those will generally start being born around June. Mom will go out, leaving her baby in the building. And this is something Diana talked about that's just so amazing, is that once they fed and they come back, they know which baby is theirs and will go right to it. That's just remarkable to me. And then once the baby has weaned late July, 1st August, then they will start going out to feed it as well. They'll hang around all the way until about November, then they'll start migrating south again. If you're wanting to come out, check your local weather and look to see what time sundown is. You'll want to get there somewhere between about 30 minutes before sundown, because they can come out from then until an hour or so after sundown. So just bring your picnic lunch or come early and eat at the Farmhouse Cafe 2 blocks away, and park along Avenue I. The warehouse is on the corner of 14th Avenue and Avenue I. You're sitting between the prison and the warehouse, but they will allow you to park there. You can stay in your car and watch, or you can bring a lawn chair and get out and sit on the sidewalk on the prison side and watch. They largely come out of the large window that Diana showed in the video. They will come out other windows and an opening on the north end of the building, but largely they come out that large window right there. They'll fly along the building going to the left there, which is south. They'll fly south and they'll get to the end of the building, and then they'll fork off, and it's like seeing a river in the sky to see them whipping through the sky in various directions. We think they go about a radius of about 50 miles from the building, looking for agriculture where they're liable to find the moths that they like to eat. They return. We believe that they return. We know that they return. They start about 2 a.m. to daylight, coming back into the building. By daylight, they're fully in the building. You won't see them past that. Let's see, what else can I tell you about it?
The predators.
I'm sorry?
Talk about the predators.
Oh, yes, the Mississippi kites. So largely in the spring, the predators that show up at the warehouse are Mississippi kites, which are kind of a falcon-like bird. And they'll line up along that roof there. And there may be 14, 15, 20 of them that will line up along that roof. And when the bats start coming out, it's like a safari. You know, you can watch them swoop in and catch a bat and then fly off to eat it. Sometimes what I've observed is the bats will send out 1 or 2 bats to lead the kites off, and then they'll start coming out. You know, the ones who sacrifice their little lives to do that, it's kind of sad, but that's kind of how they operate. So if you do come out any night of the week, but there are master naturalists there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights that can answer questions for you. If you come on a Friday night, there's specifically a bat chat that is done by a master naturalist, or Tristan Bryant, the urban wildlife biologist for Montgomery and Walker County. And like I said, my recommendation is come in the spring months when it's a little bit cooler. Also, there's more of a chance that you'll see them in the daylight. They will come out before sunset in the spring. By summer, they're waiting until dark, and it's a little bit harder to see them once it gets really dark. The other thing I wanted to tell you was that a partnership has formed between Bat Conservation International, Apex Energy, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. And they've received some funding. If you can see this, they're going to put up some large banners along the building that give a little information about the bats. And then it has a QR code somewhere on there. There's a QR code, and you can, take a picture of that QR code, and it will send you to a website that is run by Bat Conservation International that will be on this colony, so you can learn more about the colony. The last thing I wanted to tell you was there's going to be a bat symposium in May. If you just, you're just hungry for more information, there will be presenters there from Texas Parks and Wildlife, TDCJ, the Texas Department of State Health Services, AgriLife, Bat Conservation International, and others. And it's an all-day symposium. It's usually held at Sam Houston State University. I don't have a date for that yet, or the names of the speakers, so be watching for that information. And it's free, and you can come on up and meet other people and learn everything you ever wanted to know about bats, more than even what Diana has shared with you.
Oh, yeah. We could talk for hours and hours on bats. So yeah, yeah, it's good.
So
Thank you.
Do you have
Paul
time?
Nelson. I'm Paul Nelson here. I guess I was destined to have some kind of technical difficulties with this
Oh no,
presentation.
we
I
jinxed
am
you.
online now, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Terry, for covering for me. I just couldn't get the sound to come on. So thanks so much. What a great presentation. Don't have many questions that were asked. One, I want to do that first. Someone asked about the whether they forage at night or during the day. I think Jennifer's, at least for that bat, most of that's done at night, but they do most of their foraging at night. Is that correct? Most bats?
Yes. Yes, they are nocturnal. Yeah.
The other
Although there are worldwide, there are some fruit bats that work during the day, but our bats here in Texas are night.
night. The other question was about whether there was a cure or preventative for the white nose problem disease.
They are working on it. Probably Bat Conservation International is a good resource to catch up or get updates on the white nose syndrome. There's also a website that's specifically for white nose syndrome. It might be whitenose.org. I can't remember the website, but they are working on some. The trick is to do some sort of a treatment or inoculate the roost without killing off any cave organisms or microorganisms, things like that. Even some bacteria that's been found in cave systems is potentially a treatment for white nose syndrome, almost a preventative, to kind of keep it off the bats. So they're working on a lot of different options. One of the bat species we have in Texas is the tricolored bat that I mentioned, and they roost in culverts, these big box culverts, and it's not considered a natural roost. So they can actually go in those culverts when there are no bats in there and treat that culvert and kill off any fungus that might be in there. And it's not going to kill any, cave organisms because there aren't any there. So some of those treatments are a little easier to do than others. But yeah, they are working on it big time.
Okay. And that's, of course, those are what we read most about there in Texas. I don't know how far out they spread, but the white nose problem is pretty big in Texas as well. I was fascinated during your talk about agave. I watched a program, I think a documentary about a Mexican scientist that was tracking them. And he realized too that in addition to corn, the farmers, like many people, were afraid of the bats, so they would kill them and try to keep them away from their crops, agave.
Yeah.
And so they found the solution to that was to explain to the farmers that without the bat, there is no agave. Without the agave, there's no tequila. Without tequila, going to be a lot of upset people. So that
Yeah.
helped. That helped conservation. I think I don't have any other questions. I do.
Well,
So glad
it's Terry.
Yeah, I wanted Terry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
hey, someone also asked about the pronunciation of chiropterophily.
Oh, good.
So,
you said it nicely. That sounds good.
I like Philly.
Apparently that's the correct pronunciation, chiropterophily. And that's the bats that pollinate, so.
Yay. Good deal.
Yeah. And like I said, I think as far as the bats go, I think you explained. I just was recently given a bat house, and I'm glad that you mentioned they shouldn't be on trees, and I need to look a little more. I live in the woodlands, and we see a bat occasionally, so they're here. I know that.
Yeah.
And I want
it's hard to find sunny spots to put a pole, I know, in the woodlands.
Right.
So,
6 hours a day is asking for a lot, but
yeah.
I want to thank all the people that have come tonight and really appreciate your attendance. I wanted to also say that Jennifer, I've known for quite a while, and this is just one of the environmentally things that she does. Always interested in nearly any aspect of nature, and I appreciate Jennifer, you coming in and adding treat for us. Terry Mack, can I get and y'all don't go away, but I'd like Terry to talk about the Urban Naturalist Club. Are you there, Terry? There
I'm
you go.
here. Can you see that little flyer thing on your screen?
We can.
So this is a new green program that we're doing in conjunction with Village Books back on Woodlands Parkway. Our first one was a couple of weekends ago in February. As you can see on this, it's a limit of 12 kids and their adults, open to kids ages 6 through 10. We do this one Sunday a month from 1 to 2 p.m. We talked about insects last time and had great fun, especially when they put on their fly eye glasses that are all faceted so they can see how insects see things. The next one, as you can see, is coming up March 24. It's another Sunday, of course. We'll talk about feathers and beaks. So we're going to learn a little bit about how birds eat, what they eat, and the importance of feathers. So it's a lot of fun. Come out and join us, or reach out to me and I'll assign you a little hands-on project for you to try to share with these kids. So I think that's all I wanted to put in this shameless plug for, but we're really having fun with this. The kids, every time they show up for one of these events, they get to take home a small field guide, and they get a certificate saying they are recognized as a young urban naturalist by virtue of having attended. So we're having fun with this. Hope some of you will join us.
Yeah, it's a brand new program, thanks to Terry, and we appreciate the efforts. I think it's going to be successful. I don't know if Wendy made it tonight. Wendy was out of town, but I just also wanted to thank her for all her work with the ambassadors, most high school students that have joined us to help. We have a couple on our board, and that's where it all lies in the future. And the kids that are now in high school, they're going to have to carry us through. So I'm always proud of her efforts, and we've up to about 30 or so now. So appreciate that. The final thing I had was I was asked to talk about the Citizens Climate Education. HARC, Houston Advanced Research Center, invites you to tour their award-winning headquarters in the Woodlands. For the 6th year in a row, the building has earned an EPA Energy Star certification for superior energy performance and is a LEED Platinum building. And LEED, of course, is the rating that talks about the green buildings and how green you can get. And there are none better at that than a HARC building over off of Gosling. So this a chance to tour that next Thursday, March the 7th at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7 p.m. It's 8801 Gosling Road, just a little small sign off of Gosling, but the building's amazing. In the summer, quite often they have a $30 water bill. They irrigate everything they have with rainwater, etc., or it doesn't get irrigated at all. They also have their own beehives there in the garden with a lot of native plants, and that's pretty neat because they make their own honey, and that's something I don't know a lot of people understand that, but we can have beehives in our yards in the Woodlands. So I want to try to do that. Roseanne, are you able to?
I'm here. If you can come, which we would welcome you, we'll serve light refreshments. And I'm putting my email address in the chat. If I can do this there, if you can RSVP to me. There is a limited number of seats, so please let me know if you can come.
Yeah, I said they not too long ago added a whole lot of solar to the roof. And they're still looking at doing more and more things to help it. Actually,
And
on
who knows,
occasion,
they might put up some bat boxes. If you came, you could
So I
talk
think
about
that-
putting up, because there's a lot of space for
Yeah.
a good
No, I think
bat box.
that's a good idea. And I know that there's also efforts, they probably put in more water tanks and things like that, but I said on many occasions during the year, the building uses less energy than it produces and actually sells back to the grid. So I'd do that. It's a beautiful building, set in the woods, March the 7th at 6 o'clock. And in this little notice, it mentions chocolate. So I
One
think
of
that's
the things that are endangered with climate, some of the things that are endangered are grapes. And this last year, it's been potatoes and sweet potatoes that have been on the chopping block. Mustard
chocolate.
has been one of those things. So we thought we'd serve food based on climate awareness.
Good idea. Eat chocolate while you can.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Yes, thank you. If there's anything else, do you have anything, John or Terry, anything in additional?
Just a big thank you to Diana and Jennifer.
Absolutely. They were both wonderful, and how exciting that we got to hear this presentation. I know there'll be new people in